Welcome, everyone, to the virtual launch of the book, Happy at Work, a practical guide to overcoming workplace psychological harassment, written by Dr. Elizabeth Crawford Spencer. My name's Nicole Turnbull, and I'm the founder and chief courage officer at Neon Shed, which brings light to the dark sides of work. I'm a psychosocial safety consultant, and I met Liz through another virtual event, and through a series of happy circumstances, Liz is now a speaker at the upcoming Psychosocial Safety Summit, which is held in her hometown of Brisbane next month, on the 16th and 17th of October. And everyone here knows, especially in Australia, that it is Safe Work and Mental Health Month. Now, Liz is not there at the moment. She's currently in the States visiting her family, but she will be home by then. And before I introduce you to the woman of the hour, I'd like to introduce Brian Martin, who's an emeritus professor of Wollongong and wrote the foreword to the book to say a few words. Hand over to you, Brian.
Thanks, Nicole. I'm one of the lucky ones. I haven't been bullied, at least not since I was about 5 years old. But I've talked to lots of people who have. It's because I talk to whistleblowers, the people who speak out in the public interest about corruption, hazards to the public, things like that. And a lot of them suffer what's typically called reprisals. And one of the most common reprisals can be categorized as bullying. And very common for them to be ostracized, given the cold shoulder, given tasks that are too easy or too difficult, nasty comments, whole range of things. And if you read anything about bullying, you'll know that's a typical sort of techniques used. So I got interested in bullying because of whistleblowers encountering it so often and started reading up about it and ended up writing a few things. And that's what led Liz to contact me. Now, one of the things that's in the writing about bullying at work is that there's not much people can do about it. It seems like the main two choices are either put up with it or leave. And there's not too much in between. And I think what's happened in the years since I read those first books, which came out in the 90s, is that now there's a whole bunch of policies. It seems like the problem has been solved because we've got policies against bullying, but the trouble is they don't work. They hardly ever work. And I've seen that with whistleblowers. We've got whistleblower laws in Australia since the 1990s, in the US even before that, and they mostly don't work. Whistleblowers are not much better off than they were. And bullying is not just whistleblowers, it can be anybody. That's what I learned. You can just be a convenient target. It can be someone who's a serial bully. It can happen to people at the top as well as people at the bottom, and a whole bunch of reasons. Some people are just in the wrong place at the wrong time and they get targeted. So no one is exempt. Now, what's great about Liz's book is that she's one of the, I was about to say thousands of people who've been bullied, but it's actually probably millions worldwide, many millions, but very few of them escape and actually do something for others. And that's what she's done. She's not only used her own personal experience using her diary entries, but she's used her academic skills, especially the knowledge of the law, to provide a guide to others. And I think, if you've read lots of books on bullying, you don't come across many written by people from using their own personal experience in such an informed way. And that's my recommendation to any of you whenever you have a stressful event in your life, whether you're being bullied or just family problems or whatever, is write a diary. Use Liz's example and learn from it. All the best.
Fantastic. Thank you, Brian. Thank you for sharing. And I have also spoken to quite a number of whistleblowers. When you're in the industry and in the area, people share their stories. And I am really excited to read Liz's book. We will all get a copy if you're coming to the summit. She's sharing gracefully the ebook with everyone. But I found too that writing things down was quite cathartic. The reason I came into business was because I've worked for both safety regulators in New South Wales, the Workers' Comp Insurer and the Independent Review Office, and experienced bullying and sexual harassment in every single one of them. And you are so spot on with, they've got policies, they've got procedures. These agencies are there to lead the way and tell employers and workers what to do, but they don't know how to manage those things themselves. And having policies and procedures in place is ideal. You must have them as part of law. But you're right, it often doesn't do much other than gather dust on the shelf if it is printed at all. But we are here to hear from Liz, and I am very excited to introduce her now. I would love to know, Liz, and everyone else on the call would love to know as well, why you wrote the book and what it's all about.
Thank you, Nicole. And Brian, thank you so much for your kind words. And thank you everyone for coming. Wow, it warms my heart, really. Thank you so much. I'm in Connecticut at the moment, as you know, with my sister Barbara and her husband Tim. And we were talking yesterday evening, and the question came up, for each of us, can we think back to a time when we were fortunate enough, or perhaps we're fortunate enough now, to be in a work situation where there are no power games or toxic alliances at work, where everything is firing on all cylinders and each person makes the others better, where we have fun at work and we're really productive. It's great, right? That's what we all want. And that's why I wrote Happy at Work, because I have enjoyed that, and because a healthy, safe work environment is such a wonderful thing for so many reasons. Sadly, at the moment, workplace psychological abuse is rampant and it gets in the way. And I can pop some statistics in the chat afterwards or as we go. I personally became interested, as you have alluded to, as many people do quite unwittingly. A few years ago, I was offered the role of interim dean of business and law at a regional Queensland university. It was an honor, and I was excited to undertake the challenge. But not long after I started, a pattern began to emerge of gaslighting and undermining that totally blindsided me. At first, it was subtle. I didn't understand what was happening. I wasn't prepared, and I was completely confused. Up until then, all the indicators were that I'd been doing pretty well at my work for the past 20 years or so. But suddenly I was being denigrated by my boss, and it seemed everyone around me fell into line. There were not any constructive conversations. I had no idea where this was coming from, and it just didn't make sense. Over time, the subtle abuse grew less subtle. Denigration behind my back so that I couldn't defend myself, defamation in public places among colleagues, isolation, strangely orchestrated scrutiny and criticism, disappearing text messages, people shutting me out for reasons I couldn't know and therefore couldn't do anything about. The way the university handled it, or failed to handle it, compounded my distress and confusion, as well as the isolation. The game was to pretend it wasn't happening, not only at the level of the perpetrator, but also at the level of institutional betrayal, which is a term coined by our colleague Jennifer Freed in Oregon. So the game is, there's no problem here. There's nothing to see here. And if there is a problem, the problem is you. We have victim blaming. The problem is a whistleblower, a complainer who wasn't a good employee in the first place. Of course, most of the time that's far from true. You can't talk to anyone, and no one wants to talk to you when you're in this situation, it seems, or help you, it seems. The institutional betrayal is almost worse than the original abuse. It was as true for me as it is for many that workplace psychological abuse affects, and then I thought maybe a better word was infects, all of your relationships, your whole life. You question yourself about everything. You lose confidence. I'd always done well in my work and gotten along well with others. Where had I gone wrong? What should I have done? And by the way, if you seek counseling or you go through an employee assistance program, the focus there will be on what you did wrong, what the target did wrong. The problem is you. And you feel trapped, not knowing what to do, though you know something has to be done. Maybe you just dissolve. The despair is real. We often tell targets in a toxic situation, just leave. But it's costly. And some people can't leave for any number of reasons. In my case, I was able to make a fresh start at another university. And this time, I explicitly avoided taking on a management role, but the toxic dynamics soon resurfaced in a whole new context, but proving equally as complex and damaging, if not more so. And if you think about life events, divorce, moving house, the death of a loved one, on the scale of stressful life events, I'd have to say workplace psychological abuse ranks right up there. So my goal is that no one has to suffer workplace abuse ever. But until we live in that world, Happy at Work is a resource so that people can understand what they're dealing with. And it isn't always easy. The book helps people understand why organizations turn a blind eye and often compound the harm, understand the secret rules of internal policies and procedures, and they are very convoluted and perverse at times. Understand why most psychological harassment isn't illegal and often can't be stopped through legal means, and also learn ways to build institutional courage and to shift from toxic teams to collegial comradeship, to share the commitment to ending harassment and to creating safe, healthy workplaces. Happy at Work is a resource to help people make the best choices for their particular situations in ways that are most effective, beneficial, and least costly, professionally, financially, psychologically, and emotionally. Happy at Work is also about naming the issue. If Donna's here, we're working on that as we speak on an ongoing basis. The truth is, it's really hard to define psychological abuse. The book tackles that to get it out on the table so that we can no longer pretend it isn't happening, so that leaders and managers can no longer pretend that they don't know, can no longer blame the victim, or continue the charade that they're doing something to help when they know they're doing the opposite. Research shows disengaged, unhappy employees may cost an estimated 10% of global GDP, or about $10 trillion annually. On the flip side, research also highlights a causal link between happy workers and a 13 to 15% increase in productivity. We do need systemic and structural change. We also need informed, aware people with a shared vocabulary and abilities to support the infrastructure of healthy working relationships at grassroots levels. So, is there a formula for joy, synergy, and optimal productivity at work? Maybe there is. Tolstoy said all happy families are alike. What are the common threads? Some pioneering research has been done in this area by Csikszentmihalyi and others. The work that Nicole and many others are doing is advancing the agenda. Donna Stemmer of WorkRight 23 and I, as I say, are hatching a plan, so stay tuned for more on that in the next book. Meanwhile, I invite you to read and share with others Happy at Work. I hope you will find it useful and inspiring, and together we can make progress and connect with the courage for which it advocates so that we can all be happy in our work. Thank you. Thanks for coming. And thanks for listening. And I'd like now to ask Dick Heller, whom I first met in my book group in Kirribilli, in his book group in Kirribilli in Sydney. And it's a fabulous book group, and also have come to know Dick as a wonderful resource and a great human being. And he agreed to say a little bit about this undertaking. So over to you, Dick, and thanks for coming. By the way, Dick is emeritus professor everywhere. So yeah, that's thank you.
Thanks, Liz. And yeah, well, I'd like to pick up on what you said about the difficulty of defining the problem. So you really asked me to talk a little bit about how big a problem this is. And it is very difficult to know because it's so difficult to define. It's been called the silent epidemic. It's underreported, and there's a global problem. And we know about high-profile cases, but we don't know about what happens generally. So there have been a number of studies. There's the Safe Work says that about 1 in 10 people in the workforce are subject to psychological harassment. But this is almost certainly an underestimate. There's Australian Inclusion at Work Index, which was published by the Diversity Council of Australia, said 1 in 3 people in the workforce are subject to discrimination or harassment. That was in 2023 and up on 2022 and pre-pandemic. Australian Workers' Union say 50% have been bullied, harassed, exposed to conflict or inappropriate behavior. This is a global problem. Similar figures from the United States, a US workforce survey, half of the people surveyed had experienced or witnessed inappropriate behavior, and half of those were bullying, and only half of those had been reported. So this is a global problem, but it's likely that it's worse in Australia than anywhere else. There's this World Risk Poll from the Lloyd's Risk Register with a Gallup survey, where they surveyed 125,000 people from 125 countries and looked at psychological violence and harassment. And Australia and New Zealand came highest with nearly 50% experiencing any form of violence or harassment in the workplace. So I'd like to just quote, actually Liz sent me this quote from that report. Violence and harassment in the workplace is endemic. And for those who do experience it, they often experience it multiple times and in multiple forms. However, reported experience is not uniform across the world, with large differences between regions, countries, and demographics. It's clear that the current state of violence and harassment in the workplace is untenable, and there is an urgent need for action globally. So this book is very important in shining a light on this global issue. But it's not only an important book, it's a good book. It's an excellent book. It's got wonderful quotes at the beginning of each chapter. It weaves submissions to public inquiry with personal experience, reference to the literature, and leads to very many valuable suggestions for helping. So it is important, and I'm so pleased to be able to join this session to express my gratitude to Liz for shining this light on this silent epidemic. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. And it is a huge issue, and we all need to be working towards a safer workplace. And there are a lot of people doing different things, and together we can make a difference. But Liz, I would like to ask you, what are the next steps? Where to from here? I know you mentioned perhaps there's another book on the horizon. I'm excited to hear more.
Thank you. Well, as you know, I'm working with Donna. There's the so what, we've got a problem here. What are we going to do about it? And there are many things we can do, and I address that in the final chapter of Happy at Work. But I think that's only scratching the surface, to be honest. So organizations need to understand the imperative to act, which is part of what I hope the book will do in raising awareness. And maybe the word empowering is overused these days, but I hope to encourage and empower and embolden people to be able to speak up more about the issue in their workplaces and to call it out. And I think, as Dick was saying, the difficulty in defining it means that we need to be able to have the vocabulary to say, this is what it is. This is when it's happening. As you know, your podcast about sweeping everything under the rug, it's too easy, to say, well, it isn't happening. We don't know what it is, and therefore we can ignore it. So I think it's an awareness. It's a consciousness raising thing. It's getting people involved at all different levels. And again, this is something that Donna and I are working on how organizations can do that. From a regulatory theory perspective, if I put my lawyer regulator hat on, we need sanctions, and we need support for the right behaviors. And that combination, I think, needs to be carefully calculated and implemented and measured on an ongoing basis. So this isn't easy stuff. As I think everybody here knows. So I'd love to know what everybody else thinks. And because we have some, super smart, switched on, informed people, and I'm really honored that they're all here. And so I'd love for you all to share your thoughts. I don't know whether you want to kick that off, Nicole, or somebody else does. Or
Thank you, Liz. And yeah, let's open it up. So if you have any thoughts or ideas, or if you have any questions or comments for Liz, please feel free to come off mute or type them in the chat. We'd love to hear from you.
So I'll jump in. I'm Barbara Snyder. I'm Liz's sister, and I'm so proud of Liz. Congratulations. The book is great. She was here in the States, I think twice, when some of these things were happening. And I have to say, the effect on her was shocking to me as a family member. I don't think any of us who haven't been through it understand the level of distress and I don't know what else to say, grief, confusion, all the rest of it, because if, as I saw the things happening to Liz, and I think she was here at one point as she was approaching and thinking that HR was going to help her work through the situation in the workplace, and had some hope there, and then that fell apart completely. I was really shocked. I have not suffered under the illusion that HR is for the employees. I do understand the inherent conflict there. They are paid for by the company and the corporation. They are there primarily, I think, to protect the corporation from the complainer or the victim. But I'm really shocked that there aren't more avenues for someone like Liz, for an ombudsman, for some sort of outside person in an organization to help guide them through and come to what would be a good resolution, a positive resolution, where people see what has actually happened and acknowledge it. Because as I look at Liz, how is the person supposed to move on if the issue is not even acknowledged, if the event is not even acknowledged as happening? So anyway, those are my thoughts as a witness. But I'd like to ask Liz, do you feel this is something that you experience more, maybe more because you're a woman? Do you feel you experienced it? Why previously in your career do you think you didn't? And now all of a sudden, as you move up in the ranks of your organizations, did you experience it?
Thanks, Pa. I do think it is a problem that perhaps is a little bit more pernicious at higher levels of management in universities and perhaps in other organizations as well. In the book, I do address some industries and areas that have higher incidence of workplace psychological abuse. Healthcare is one. Education may be another, is probably another. I think anyone who's vulnerable is in any way. So groups that are, not any sort of group that might encounter discrimination of one kind or another is probably more likely to encounter workplace psychological abuse. But I suppose in my mind, and then there are, studies that say, well, are they higher performers, and therefore they can't be performance managed out, and so they become targets of harassment instead. I think there's so much. It's such a complicated question, and to me, it is a great question, but I think it should never deflect the attention away from the perpetrator and why do people engage in these kind of activities? Because by focusing on the characteristics of the target, the sad thing is that then we're it's a sort of an offshoot of target blaming, rather than assigning the responsibility to the actor who's actually carrying out these behaviors. Yeah, thank you. And other people may have other views, because as I know how smart you are.
Hi. Can I jump in? Hi, everyone. Lovely to see everyone. If I haven't met you yet, I'm Jess Hickman. I'm the founder of a business called Bullyology. So I'm really excited, and congratulations, Liz. It's not easy for you to write in a book. But I think that what plays into this conversation, and something I see in my work a lot, is tall poppy syndrome. And Barbara, just to answer your question, I suffered extensive bullying the higher I went up in an organization. And I came from overseas, from the UK, moved to Australia, was promoted upwards, and that tall poppy syndrome and it played into place because I was a female in a male-dominated industry. Construction, oil, gas, and mining is my background. And that tall poppy syndrome, unfortunately, was a big catalyst, and I see it in my work. So when I deliver training, I talk about psychosocial harm, bullying, harassment, discrimination, and I've started to include conversations around tall poppy syndrome, and that aha moment for people when they recognize that that is actually a dynamic that's playing out in their workplace. And sometimes they are part of the problem, where they may not be backing their colleagues' success because of jealousy or this culture of gossip and backstabbing. So I think it's definitely something that plays into, it can start off as subtle behavior, but then can escalate into mistreatment, bullying, or harassment. So they're just some of my observations, particularly in Australia, where there is a really prominent culture of tall poppy syndrome and knocking another down for success.
Thank you so much, Jess. And Jess, if you don't know, is the author of The Upstander Leader as well. So she's big in this space and doing some fantastic things too. So thank you so much for your feedback and input. Both Jess and Liz have been on the podcast Under the Rug at Work, so I will share a link to that, as well as a link on how to get the book, to get a free sample chapter, and everyone today will receive a recording of the event as well. However, it's not over, so if anyone, does anyone else have any questions for Liz or any thoughts or ideas?
I might just make an observation that having been involved in Masters of Public Health courses for, throughout my career, this has never appeared in any syllabus or any discussions on this. So, it's just not mentioned, not recognized, not thought about as a big public health problem, which it is. I don't know the answer to that, but it's just an observation.
Yes, it's missing in schools, it's missing in homes, it's missing in workplace training, it's missing in TAFE and education. And I know there are a few people doing things in that space. Jess and I do training to help and support people, but really we need to learn to manage conflict in the home and then at school. And then if we were taught some of these basic skills, then we may not have such huge issues that we're seeing in the workplace. It's a bit of a cycle, and it's about where do we start? Michelle mentioned, family and domestic violence is also a crisis that we're actually starting to recognize here in Australia, and what the linkage of that could be through, workplace abuse and home abuse as well. And yes, Jess has just mentioned too that we're in a bystander epidemic. And I find the reason we have these issues is because people have no clue what to do. People want to stand up. They want to be able to prevent it themselves. They want to be able to say something to the person. They want to be able to support their team if it's happening as a manager or even as HR and work health and safety. But because we don't know what to do, we don't know how to de-escalate. We don't know how to hold the person to account or reduce the conflict, we often do nothing. And unfortunately, nothing gets us nowhere except for a worse problem. So we really need to continue learning. We need to continue talking about it. We have to continue finding and sharing solutions. And there are a lot of solutions in the book. There's podcasts out there. There's amazing people like Jess, like Liz, like Donna, who are doing incredible work in the area. And just before we close, I want to mention that you can meet Liz in person. She will be speaking alongside Dr. Donna Stemmer at the Psychosocial Safety Summit, and they're going to be diving into a topic that is causing a lot of contention and no one is agreeing on, and that is where psychosocial safety sits in an organization. I did a post about it on LinkedIn recently, and there was not one consistent view at all. And it was interesting. There was a lot of people pointing the finger at it should be someone else, or there was some people saying, no, it should be with me. And in the legal profession, that's or the legal departments, they believe that it should be with them. So there's going to be a lot of discussion or perhaps debate at the summit. I don't know if we're going to reach an agreement, but I suppose it's not about reaching agreement in any of these issues. It's about talking about the things that are too difficult to talk about and that most people sweep under the rug, because if we cannot talk about them, we cannot begin to find solutions. So at the summit, we'll also be diving into all of the things that workplaces are experiencing right now and having problems with. And that includes, things like the psychological impact of physical injuries, navigating gender and generational differences. People are a little bit too scared to touch that one, so I'm diving straight into that one. Also things like, managing alcohol, putting the brakes on burnout, and supporting staff who might be experiencing domestic abuse. That's just a sneak peek. We're having 16 incredible speakers, Liz being one of them, and anyone who joins the summit gets the ebook for free. I will send a link to that for anyone who would like to join us. But I would love to say a huge thank you to Dick, Brian, and Liz for coming on today, for doing this virtual launch, and really appreciate everything that you're doing. And Liz, I cannot wait for the next book and to get a copy of the hard copy of this book.
Nicole, thank you so much. Thanks, Brian. Thanks, Dick. Thank you, everyone, for coming. I'm really this has been a great conversation. From my perspective, I just wish I wish it could go on, but it has to stop. And I hope to see everyone continuing the conversation at the Psychosocial Safety Summit in Brisbane in October and beyond. Thanks everybody for coming. Thanks, Nicole.